Hey everybody, welcome to the Sessions Canceled podcast. So the machine spirit and Sam's computer just said no. The Psalms of the Mechanicus just weren't working. The ungent oils not working for Sam today. He may join us later, but I doubt it. But anyway, yeah, we're the Sessions Canceled podcast, where we talk about ridiculous mechanics and roleplay and anything else that you could usually see in the TTRPG space. It's me, Isaiah, and I'm joined by Josh.
Hello, he threw me off with the Warhammer references. I wasn't ready.
Matt.
Hi there, I am also here.
All right, boys. So
I am also here. No, Matt, I thought you were somewhere else.
No, it's just gonna be the new thing. Or it's like, and Matt, and me too. It's like, nope.
I am
all right,
also
boys.
Here.
So I've been thinking about this a little bit recently. I've been thinking about this because of one of our previous episodes. And this kind of leads technically all the way back to the first episode. And that topic in question is backgrounds and backstories. Particularly like how GMs usually confront getting backstories from players, or your experiences writing backstories, the sort of methodology you use going into creating a backstory, what you do for that character, how hard do you go, how much do you write, what you expect in terms of mechanical or...
In terms of the Mechanicus?
The Mechanicus, yes. Mechanical or roleplay boons or setbacks it may give you, and how much work you usually expect or are expected to do as a GM to implement a player's backstory into your game.
All right, you got all that on like a sticky note? Because you just threw a lot of...
I do, actually.
There's a lot of questions that just...
Yeah, don't you worry, sir. I wrote them all down. There you go, bud. They're in the chat. Congrats.
Damn, I thought this week, I thought we have to, we had the fighter talk last week, and the week before that, we talked about feats. I thought you were going to say backs. So I'm like, all right, boys, what about backs do we like? And I'm like, yes, finally.
I do like me a good...
that one Cabaneri clip.
I do like me a good muscly back. I won't deny that.
Yes, sir.
But yeah, I mean, I said this... I don't even remember what podcast, just Podblast? Podblast. No.
Brain blast.
Man, we still have some leftover XP smoothie from months ago, folks. It's still hitting us.
Hell yeah, but, Jimmy Neutron references. Let's go, gamers.
But yeah, I think for backstories when it comes to like how just the kind of like how long they should be, as a player, like I try to keep it a little short. I think the last few characters, because most of my time has been GMing, I kind of went a little overboard. And I did the thing where I wrote like a lot. And honestly, as a player, and write as much, don't write like 2-3 pages. But like, yeah, write what, everything about your character, write all that. And as DMs, as a dungeon master, I'm one of the people who, I know, again, I said it earlier where I'm like, please, for the love of God, don't write more than like a few paragraphs. But I think now I'm like thinking about it for a while. I'm like, you know what? Let it fucking write whatever. I will make the time to sit there and read it. Cause that's what I did with my campaigns. Like I sat there and I had players who wrote nothing. And I had players who wrote goddamn gargantuan fucking massive backstories.
Yeah.
And I used all of it. So.
Yeah. I don't think you can avoid that particular scenario. Like, you're always going to have the player who's like, backstory, what's that? And then the one player who's like, here's the Bible, my lord. And you're like,
I wrote a whole novel. It's like, oh, geez.
So it's interesting because I was doing some light research online, not much. And there was a take that I've seen online, but I've also actually seen in a few videos where people say your backstory should basically equal a number of paragraphs per level that you start at, which is an interesting take, right? Like if you start at level 1, your backstory should be a paragraph long. Level 2, if you start, it should be 2 paragraphs, and so on and so forth and so on and so forth. I don't know how I feel about that.
Yeah, nah.
I've never heard of that before.
Yeah, no, I do. Instantaneous disagreeal with that take.
I mean, I think so. The thing with the backgrounds, and this is like something where we're seeing it now with Wizards of the Coast and a lot of other people online who are like, oh, the backgrounds, I wish they did more, or I wish the backgrounds like gave more. And now Wizards are like, all right, well, backgrounds give feats, and especially with the Magic the Gathering books, all the backgrounds when it comes to Ravnica, they give you new spells depending on what background you pick. I'm not sure with Theros exactly. I'm blanking on it. Okay. But at least with Ravnica, they did that. And now with Strixhaven, like the backgrounds give you feats tied to the setting and all this shit. So I think Wizards are, and now especially since one of the few podcasts ago when we talked about the Dragonlance feats and backgrounds, Wizards are slowly starting to implement feats into backgrounds and all this. And I don't know. It's one of those things where
hold on.
Wait, let me just finish before one.
I'm confused.
Well, that's why I'm getting my point out. I think now Wizards are trying to play around with trying to implement more into backstories, and I feel like backstories, like the background mechanic in D&D, and just backstories in general, like I think the backgrounds are fine and they're a good jumping off point. I don't think you need more than that. And as your story progresses through your campaign, you can just add stuff and like add it to your backstory, or be like, so like, does your character have a fear of spiders? And it's like, well, now you mention it, you can just add it in. It's very like, I think backgrounds and backstory should be like a little bit flexible in some cases.
All right, wait, hold on. I feel like we need to make a delineation here because I feel like we're talking about two different things.
Kind of.
Because Isaiah was talking about like writing a backstory, and then you're talking about backgrounds mechanically. Those aren't like they interact, but aren't necessarily the same thing. All right.
Yes and no. I mean, like, well, because someone mentioned the backgrounds, and that's where I kind of jumped in.
Well, I think Isaiah was. I think Isaiah said the word background, but I think he was referring to backstories with his initial question.
Well, I said both because this episode is backgrounds and backstories. I do want to talk about.
Right. I just feel like we haven't gotten to the background part yet. I feel like I feel like I'm confused now. Because the thing you just said about like your backstory should only be 8 long is separate from what Matt was just talking about.
Yeah, it is, but it was an interesting thought, so that's why I didn't say anything, because I was interested in what he was talking about. So it's all right, and it'll come up later. So it's a good like start of a segue that we can cash in later on.
Well, I feel bad backtracking, but I feel like I want to backtrack on your previous thing a little bit here. So I'm just gonna ignore everything you said, Matt. No, I'm kidding. I want to backtrack though, because so the whole thing of like your backstory should be X long, right? Level 1, you get a paragraph or whatever. Although actually, I will say in relation to what Matt was just saying, yes, you definitely should tie your background to your backstory. They should definitely intertwine with each other. You shouldn't just treat the background like a mechanical choice and that's it. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. But the idea of limiting it for like 1 level equals 1 paragraph, I don't think that feels unnecessary and like unnecessarily restrictive. And I think when it comes to quote unquote how much you should write, I don't know if putting rules and limiters is going to solve the issue, because if the person who wants to write a Bible, you just say to them, well, you're only allowed to write a paragraph, they're just going to write like a long rambly paragraph, and then they're going to be annoyed at you because they want to like write out their Bible. I think the problem, or not even the problem, the thing to take into account is if you're going to write a Bible, just understand that you can't expect your GM to read the whole thing. They might, but you can't assume they're going to, because I don't know if either of you have ever done this. I haven't, but I've sort of contemplated it. Some people just want to write a big long thing just to have something kind of down just for themselves, and then sort of like give their GM key points, right? Like, this is my mom's name, this is my dad's name, here's a little bit of like my family, here's what I did as a job. And there's going to be way more information in the actual written backstory, but they don't expect you to read it or whatever. I think that I don't know if you've done that personally, but I think that's kind of the best way to handle it.
I think that's pretty good. Like, so like, I write out the whole backstory.
Yeah, because some people just want to write it.
Spark notes. Yeah.
Some people just find that part fun. Or the other thing I think some people do is they will write it, they'll start writing, and as they're writing, they will be like, oh, I didn't think about this before, let me add this. They'll start to formulate it as they go.
Yeah, so I definitely did do that with Sam when I was writing my backstory for for Nico in Vampire the Masquerade. Where I think I wrote more than everybody. I think I wrote like 4 pages and I still wasn't done.
I definitely didn't write that much.
Yeah, I went really hard just because that's kind of what the rule book kind of told you to do. Like you needed to have all of these characters that were connected to you. Yeah. So I feel like not having them come up in the backstory would be kind of weird. And then, you have to sort of explain the meeting with your vampire clan and how you're embraced and all this stuff. But I did tell Sam, like, most of this is my character struggling as a teenager back in 40s New York, right? Like, I don't expect you to know and or care about all this because I don't expect it to come up all that much.
Well, I think it's also an interesting little side point that when you're playing a game that's set in modern times, it's way easier for you to go way harder on the backstory because when you're dealing with the real world and actual like history, you have all this extra juicy knowledge and information that you can very easily tie. I might not know what jobs were back in the 1500s, but I know what jobs my character could have when in the 1960s as a teenager, right? So like it's way easier to write more because it's a like actual real world setting situation. And I think that happens with people quite a lot where your idea, how you look at your character is very different when you're dealing with this is taking place in the real world or a real world adjacent thing. So it's not surprising that your vampire character had a crazy long backstory. Also, Vampire the Masquerade as a or what's it called? What did they call what does the White Wolf call their thing? World of Darkness.
Yeah.
World of Darkness has a history of long, rambly, novelistic writing nonsense. So, you're in good company in that particular game.
I've heard as much. So, yeah, I mean, that's probably the longest backstory I've ever written. And again, it's not even complete, right? Like,
same.
I could keep going and going and going for Nico just because Nico, I brought this up session 2 or 3 session. I keep calling these episodes sessions. I feel like that's pretty apt. I think we should start calling it sessions.
Session 14.
I mean, yeah. But yeah, episode 2 or 3, like I was like, Nico is an interesting experiment for me in the way that a lot of White Wolf and World of Darkness is as like a weird expression of self.
Yeah.
That I can like freely experiment with. So there was a lot going into that. There's a lot of personal stuff going into Nico's backstory.
Yeah,
which sort of informed things that happened later on. Lol, Lamau.
Yeah, there's a weird history of that built into the World of Darkness games, and I don't know why, but I know it's a thing.
Yeah, there is a notoriety with World of Darkness games of that. Like I know almost nothing about VTM, but even I knew like you're gonna discover things about yourself thanks because of VTM.
It's kind of similar to the like, oh, JoJo makes people realize they're gay joke. Like there's a similar energy with Vampire the Masquerade.
Yeah, I mean guilty as charged. So like yeah.
Right, yeah, well that's what I mean. Like it's a weird thing. Like I don't know where it comes from, but it's this thing that everyone is like, yep, that happened, and you're like, oh, okay. Interesting.
Cannot relate, but cool.
I personally can't relate, but I've seen it happen and I've heard people talk about it. So it's definitely it's a funny thing.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
So I think that sort of covers the first 2 questions of like how long are your backstories usually. Actually, I don't think I ever answered this. Usually, I think it's worth noting, I don't write backstories. I've said this quite a few times on this podcast, but usually I let my backgrounds evolve organically because I find that more fun and more interesting. Because if I forget a part of my own lore and then the GM's like, no, that didn't actually happen. It's like, well, could it have reasonably happened? And I've had situations where it's like, no. You're like, but what? But it's my backstory. What the hell do you mean? I was only asking as a formality. Like,
asking.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's true, right? Like, could this happen in my backstory? If it like breaks the mechanics, right? If it's like, no, you couldn't do weird,
you can't
crazy.
be a deity.
You couldn't yeah, you couldn't kill the fucking beholder at level 0 because no.
Right.
Obviously no. But if it's like, oh yeah, you know, like my uncle ran a bar outside of Baldur, like, you know, in the outskirts of Baldur's Gate. That's something where it's like, you know, if you don't write that down, it doesn't exist until you say it exists, right? You sort of write it into existence organically, and I like that a lot.
Yeah.
But I've had situations where I have to become the encyclopedia for my character for the GM, which can be frustrating when someone's like, wait, what happened in your backstory again? I'm like, interesting that you asked. Hold on, let me pull my my mental encyclopedia up. Yeah, it kind of sucks. Like, I've realized that kind of sucks. So I'm starting to be better, or I'm trying to be better at writing something down for the GM and then letting the rest evolve organically on its own. So like the stuff for Yato with his mom and dad and all that was all written down, but like the Yato learning all these martial arts off the street from like watching fights in alleyways and bars, and him having like a weird photographic memory for that kind of task mastering it, that is just something I said. And
well, okay, so that's an interesting, actually, there's a good point there. So there's a difference between those two things you just mentioned, right? Because you're like, oh, so I wrote the part about Yato's family, I wrote down. The part about Yato's weird eidetic memory, I didn't write down, right? The difference there is information about Yato's family. I guess we should just real quick. Yato is Isaiah's monk character in our current game. The difference is information about Yato's family is something that the GM could and or should potentially use in the game, right? That is information that the GM should have because they can do something with it. It's relevant. It's about NPCs, right? Like it's relevant to the GM to know that. Your GM doesn't need to know your monk has an eidetic memory because there's nothing they can do with that, right? That is purely for you as a player to sort of act out or role play or just to do something with, right? So
yeah,
that's, I think, an important thing to keep in mind when you're doing backstory stuff is if you start writing down a bunch of crap about your character's backstory and then you look at it and you realize that none of the information you just wrote down is something your GM can or will use in any way, then it's not good information, right? It's not useful. You don't need to write it down. Information like where your character used to live, what their job used to be, what people they know or used to know, that's all good stuff because your GM can do something with all of that, right? That's proper nouns that your GM can scoop up and be like, I'm going to use these. But writing down that your wizard's really fucking good at math, your GM doesn't care because your GM can't do anything with your wizard being really good at math. That's for you to have. So that's a good way to curate your backstory, is look at it and be like, is this information I'm writing down something I could relevantly give to the GM?
Josh, what if they get into a dungeon and they have to solve a math problem and there the math wizard comes in? Finally, my time to shine.
That's
all those math SATs in my background.
But you could just play that out in the moment, right? Like, it doesn't need to be written down. Now, if it's a situation where there is a mechanical effect, like D&D doesn't really do this, but other games will do this, where you'll build your like background in a mechanical sense, and it will give you certain abilities, and those abilities are sort of indicators to the GM, right? So, for example, you know, you could have, well, actually, I guess D&D does actually do this a little bit with this is essentially what the background features are, where it's like, oh, my character lived out in the woods, there's an outlander, so they have an ability that says they can forage, right? That kind of stuff where it has a mechanical implication, then yes, you can write it down and your GM might need to know that information. But if it's just, you know, my monk had learned how to fight because he has an eidetic memory, it's like, well, yeah, that doesn't matter. That's for you as a player to utilize. So yeah, it's just I think that's just a good technique to curate how much information you're writing down if you feel like you're writing down a lot. And granted, if you want to write down a shitload of information for the sake of just having it, then what you do is you write down all that information and then you pull all of the GM relevant information out and say, here's the GM version that's curated. I'll have my own version over here. That's more work, but you know, it's helpful. Or
Yeah, I mean,
could be.
It's all true enough. Like, I agree.
Yeah, I just, when you mentioned that, I was like, oh, that's a good, good
Yeah,
point.
I feel like, but I feel like mostly that's like, I don't want to even say the GM's job, but like, GM reads the backstory, then they pick out like the bits. It would be helpful if players do that, but like,
yeah, but you make their life way easier if you do it.
I know.
You know,
but I don't feel like it's one of those things where like some players might. If you the DM up front asks, I feel like players would, you know, probably like most
look,
of them
man,
would.
players need to help GMs out more.
Like, yeah.
Wait, what were you saying, Matt?
No, I was gonna say then probably like one person might not do it. But I think if you, as a GM, like upfront, be like, hey guys, sorry, in your backstory, do me a favor, like after you write out whatever the fuck, just write like, you know, a couple bullet points for me or something, you know, or some lines like here are the important bits, or something I can use.
Yes.
But there's also, oh sorry, no, what were you gonna say?
Yeah, no, I'm agreeing. I'm agreeing as you're. I'm just yes.
But I also feel like then, because this is kind of like a sub thing, then I feel like that's when like players they start going like, oh okay. Oh, the DM wants to use my backstory for stuff. My parents are dead. He can't use anyone against me. And it's like, all right, come on, man. That's not what that's not what I meant.
That's kind of a whole other. That's getting into like GM trust and stuff. That's like a different. Yeah,
that'll be episode 69.
Yeah, that's like a different topic.
Can of worms.
Yeah,
right.
yeah, different can of worms. But I get what you're saying.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I agree.
I'm just trying to put be the change you want to see in the world. I'm trying to put that energy out there in the world and saying, hey players, help your GMs out more, because there's this weird culture we have where the GM does a disproportionate amount of work and it bothers me. So, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. It's not a like unfair claim to make, being like, you know, like I'm already going through all this effort of making the game and the characters and the plot points.
Yeah.
Throw me a bone. Like, yeah, I think that's a fair thing to say.
Oh, and to a point Matt mentioned, yes, if you are that on the other side of the table, if you are that GM who gets handed a stupid long backstory and you're like, what the fuck am I supposed to do with all this information? Pull out the important bits, and you might say to yourself, how do I know what the important bits are? Proper nouns. Anything with a name is the important bits. Everything else doesn't matter. You don't need to know that like they have 6 siblings who do these 8 different jobs, but you might need to know the siblings' names. That's relevant information. You know, you don't need to know
or number. If they're like, I have 6 siblings, right, and it's like, okay. It's like they don't tell me if they're like some, like they don't tell me their names, they don't tell me genders. It's just 6 siblings. And I'm like, okay. Then like as the DM, then that's when you're like, ooh, nice. Now I get to randomly make these characters.
Could, yeah,
it's like, fuck it.
Yeah, you could take it in that direction. But like, you don't need to know that their mom is a baker, but knowing mom's name and knowing that like mom is alive or dead, you know, that proper nouns is really like the key, you know. Or actually, here's a better example. You don't need to know, you don't really need to know that your ranger has traveled the woods for 30 eons and is a master at carving mushrooms. But you might want to know that they went to this one mountain that has a name one time. You know what I mean? It's that kind of thing. It's like,
what if the mushroom carving's like a character quirk? What if that's just like, you know,
that's player information. The GM doesn't need that. What does the GM do with that? That goes back to what I was saying before.
What if the GM decides to like be nice and have a whole like mushroom carving festival specifically for that player?
Sure, if it comes up, I guess, but
I'm just trying to throw any kind of monkey wrench I can.
I mean, how often is that going to happen though, right? Like, sure, you could have a thing where it's like, oh, maybe there's a scene where Yato gets to show off that he has an eidetic memory, but that could just come up because like in a wow, let's try that sentence again. That could come up in a natural sense, or it could just come up from Isaiah mentioning it, and then who's ever running the game being like, interesting point. I'm going to put that in later down the road, you know? It doesn't have to be in the backstory.
Especially if a player keeps doing it, then, you know, it might reinforce the GM, be like, this is important.
Yeah, I mean, it's really funny. I've done that a few times across characters, being like, this character just remembers most things that happen, and it's just because like I don't take notes during session. I've said this before and I'll say it again. I just don't I can't. It just don't, shit don't work. I've tried, don't work. So like my first ever campaign, I brought this up before, where I'm bringing up characters that we met in session 2 when we're like at a session 186. And I'm like, oh, how's that character doing? Like, what are they like? How are they? You know, the blacksmith lady from like from the starting area we were in, like the big castle fortress. And the GM's like, who the fuck are you even talking about right now? I was like, yeah, check your notes. Check your notes. I bet you they'll be there. And then like, you know, you could hear the cogs spinning in their head, and they're like, oh my god, that character? I was like, yeah, I told you. Like, I do that a lot. I don't really know why I do, but I do. And it's always funny when it's like, yeah, like this character basically just has the keen mind feat, because I don't think I have the keen mind feat, but I think I have a very good memory for things like that.
As far as the realm of how much writing of a backstory do, yeah, not a whole lot. I'll write a little bit down just to have something to chew on, but it'll usually be pretty open and not super like detailed, because more or less like you do, Isaiah, I tend to be like, yeah, it'll come up when it comes up, and I'm not going to get like all crazy in it. I'll have a couple of relevant like major players in the backstory, and then I might mention like a couple of key events, and then other than that, I keep it pretty open-ended. You know, like I think the only character I mentioned in like Zigzag's backstory was his dad. That was it. You know, I didn't mention like any other NPCs or anything like that. But much like you, my Vampire the Masquerade backstory was longer than normal. So yeah, there's something about that game.
Have you guys used the Xanathar's guide, like whole like the background, or not even backstory? It's like the whole like this is your life mechanics, where it's like rolling random events and a bunch of stuff, and that's how you build your backstory. Or have you not like ever looked at it? Like, some of it's pretty cool.
I'm not into it.
No,
I don't want to leave my like character's life up to like random rolls like that.
Right.
Yeah, I'm of a similar vein to that. Like I've almost been in games where people have used the heroic chronicles from Wildmount.
Yeah,
and
I was gonna bring that up.
Cool. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't be completely opposed to it, but something about the randomness of it, I am not a massive fan of. Like,
so there is a little bit of a difference, though. I think that's worth pointing out is the Xanathar's chapter called "This Is Your Life" is just a bunch of random bits of information that is just on a bunch of random tables. You roll it, and then you have some info, right? The Heroic Chronicles actively gives you stuff for your character when you start, so it has more of a mechanical influence. So that's a little more intriguing to me, because it, even if you don't use the random tables, it puts forth the possibility of starting out with some more unique and interesting things. You know what I mean?
I suppose, yeah.
Because, like, if I remember correctly, some of the Heroic Chronicles stuff, it's like, oh, you have a horse because X, Y, and Z thing from your your background and your family life and so on and so forth. So that stuff I'm a little more intrigued by, because it puts that potential on the table, as opposed to the Xanathar's one, which is just sort of like a bunch of random events that happened in your life, and then you use them to make a backstory. And I'm kind of like, meh, not as crazy about those.
Yeah, the Heroic Chronicle does have some of those. Like, it's like how many siblings you have and stuff like that. That stuff I'm less about, because I prefer to just do that myself. Like I said, I don't want that dictated by something random.
Yeah.
But if it's like, well, you have a horse, or you have a rival, or you have like, in your hometown, you have some childhood friends that you may know, but you don't necessarily, like, you might know them in the sense that you know them, but they're not plot relevant, stuff like that. That stuff I'm more into.
Yeah, well, and also putting them in a random table just means that they exist. You don't actually have to roll, right? You could just choose off of the table. You could just pick.
Yeah.
So that's the other thing.
And that's like the secret of the random tables. They don't have to be random. They don't have, they could just be a list.
I think
you can pick one.
Yeah, I think the big difference, though, for like at least the three of us here, well, and Sam, if he were here. Rip Sam, the mechanic of spirits taking thee. I think for all of us, we are, we're experienced enough and creative enough and interested enough in various, mediums like movies and books and video games and all that we don't have a hard time concocting a character backstory out of thin air. But I think some people do have a little bit of a harder time with that. They don't quite feel that creative juice flowing all the time. And those are the kind of people those tables are like more directed at, which is fine. Like, I'm not saying the tables like shouldn't be there or whatever, but they're definitely not targeted at me or I don't think they're really targeted at any of us.
I mean, I like using them for like inspiration, like any of the tables. Just to kind of like, maybe they'll have an idea that I haven't thought of, and I'm like, oh, okay. Or maybe they have an idea, and I'm like, I can try to warp that into my own version or something.
Yeah,
Just, inspiration.
Yeah, maybe if you're feeling a little dry on ideas, like, I'm feeling a little like spent.
Yeah, I mean, it's a resource. I think resources are always worth looking into. For players like us, I feel like you should be able to just be like, I'm just gonna, like, looking at the GM being like, all right, bud, so I'm just gonna pick for anything that isn't mechanical, right? I'm just gonna choose it. Like my character's height and their family and all that shit. I'm gonna pick that myself if it's all cool with you, but I'm like willing to roll for, again, things like rivals and teachers and stuff like that I may know along the way. That stuff I'm fine with.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you go, I'm trying to think of a word for it. It's one of those things where you look at and go like, not for me, but probably useful for somebody,
I mean, I think when I originally told my players I wanted to run Dragon Heist, I wanted to use so James Hake, fantastic D&D writer, game designer. He made because he worked on the Wildmount book, and then he was working on D&D Beyond at the time, and he made a version for the Forgotten Realms. And yeah, and it's very cool. It's very interesting, and like the whole the fateful moments are specifically for the Forgotten Realms, and each one, some of them tie into actually some of the campaigns. Like there's one for Avernus, there's one for Tyranny of Dragons, there's one for Storm King's Thunder, and then like some of the other ones that were in the Wildmount book as well. And it feels like I would like to use that mechanic, but I don't know if, again, it's like, I don't know if everyone's going to be like really jazzed about it, as I am as a DM, because I think it's a neat like tool.
I mean,
think
is
it's
there
a neat
anything
feature.
Stopping you from having some players use it and some players not use it?
I guess. I don't know. I guess it would feel weird if like only like 3 people were using it at my table, and like the others were like, I just want a free feel level 1 or some nonsense. And they're like, I don't know.
Here's the
Sure,
trick.
I mean,
I don't know.
go on, Josh.
Here's the secret sauce. The first couple of people start using it, everyone else goes, oh wait, that's kind of cool, and then everyone starts using it. Trick.
There's that.
Yeah,
that's real.
I
That
think-
happens.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's also worth like, if you want to tell your players, and this is kind of what I was talking about with the weapon options thing, right? A few episodes back, is like, you don't have to do this, but taking the time and or taking the risk can offer you some serious rewards, right? Like if you're like, oh, I want to play a mounted combatant. We're not going to talk about shitty mountain fighting. It is on something like D&D, but it's fine. But if you're like, oh, I want to play a mountain combatant, and you don't start with a horse because you didn't do the Chronicle, like I'm kind of fine with, as a player and a GM, being like, well, that's just on me, right? Like I didn't want to do the things, so I don't get all the extra cool little biddies, you know?
Yeah.
And, you can tell the player like, hey, you can do parts of it, right? Like, I keep going back to like, if you don't want to do all of it, at least do parts of it. Because there's not like, you are actively gaining things for this, right? You're really not losing much. So just give it a try. Actually, I backtrack a little bit. Matt, did you say how much you usually write?
Like backstories.
Yes.
So I mentioned that the last 2 characters I've made, because I've been GMing for so long, I kind of went a little ham. I went a little overboard.
That's right.
I think it's basically a page that I made for both characters. I think the Icewind Dale character might be a little less, because I think for the vampire beast barbarian for our magical school game, Sam gave me a lot of information on vampire and lore and how he uses them in their world. And I think what I ended up doing was taking that and specifically like, you know, all right, so vampires do this. So this is what my character, you know, does this, or this is why my character does this thing. So I was kind of like answering and checking off certain like vampire checkboxes to hit into the backstory on top of my own, like, you know, vampire Angie nonsense. She's a barbarian.
All right, cool.
So you said the last two characters you went overboard. Does that mean normally you don't write a whole lot?
Normally not really. I would write like a paragraph, or I think with my first character, the rogue, I think it was literally a paragraph, and then I did the meme of he has amnesia. I have no backstory. Here you go, Gio. And I feel like, honestly, that was kind of partially a dick move, but it was also my first character. And I had no idea what I was doing. So it was kind of like one of those where like, hey man, I don't know what I'm doing. I want to play the character and learn them as I go along. And then I kind of did.
Should we get into the amnesia thing?
Yeah, why not?
Because, yeah, okay.
I'm assuming
I'm trying
from getting the sense that you don't like it.
I'm trying to think about. I'm trying to formulate the thought in my head without going spicy hot take brigade here.
Okay. Stop being lazy out there, all you players. Come up with your fucking backstory. No, I'm kidding.
Look, you know, Matt, I'm not gonna lie. I kind of want to say that, but I'm trying to be. I'm trying to think of, you know, be civil about the situation.
You're trying not to call out our editor.
You know, it's not even so much that. Okay, here's the thing. Yes, I understand some people are like, I don't really fucking whatever backstory, not that important. I get it. That's fine. But you need to give, because here's the thing. Even if you say to your GM, my character has no backstory, like there's no relevant information about them, right? Even if you say that to your GM, you are lying to your GM and to yourself, because in your brain, as you're playing this character, you are going to formulate information about this character that would come from their past. It is impossible not to, unless you are playing 100% like a chessboard, right? If you're playing 100% chess, what's it called? Miniature style. There's a name for that, like, style of play. Unless you are playing 100% board game fashion where you just don't speak in character and it's never like there's barely any story and it's just your dungeon fucking and that's it, you're going to have a backstory in your head about your character, because it is impossible to play a blank slate human being or dragonborn or vampire or elfman or troll, or you can't play a blank person who was born yesterday. That's basically impossible, because that's not how people work. And we are human beings playing the game, so we can't not imprint our own logic onto the game, right?
Right. I think because I'm trying to remember with the rogue character, I think it was literally, I have amnesia. I woke up and then I'm a rogue because I literally woke up with no memory of anything. I have nothing to my name, so I have to steal and lie to get shit. And then there you go. And then I built the character from that.
Which is a very common thing. A lot of people do exactly that kind of a backstory. And I mean, shit, the which one is it? The Phantom Rogue, the one where like you talk to ghosts and stuff. I'm pretty sure one of the like potential backgrounds to your, or one of the like things it mentions about your powers is you could be like a person who died and was resurrected or something like that, right? So yeah, you could totally. Oh no, sorry, it's not the Phantom. I think I was thinking of the Reborn, the Van Richten guide lineage.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is a thing that is part of the, like, it's kind of a meme in the community, right? Like, it's always kind of been a part of the tabletop thing. Like, my character has amnesia. But even when your character has amnesia, you're still going to formulate certain things about the character's personality and who they are and their background and stuff, because it's just impossible to play a blank slate robot person because you are not a robot in real life, you know? So, all that being said, to what should you do if you're like, well, I don't want to play a character with this deep, complex backstory? That's fine. You don't have to. All you need to do is give your GM enough little tidbits about your character that they can have something to ground you to the world. That's it, right? You could just say, my character was born in this town and they have 2 parents that live there. And that could be like it. And you're like, I became a rogue because I ran away from home. And then, you know, I had to steal to like survive. That's fine.
No, I ran away from home, then I had amnesia, and now I'm a rogue. And I don't remember my
So hold on. The amnesia thing is separate, right? So 1 second, hold on, because there's a little bit more to it. So yeah, you could just do that. If you want to go the amnesia route, that's fine. I still think what you should do is at least be like, oh, my character's from this place, and they might have some family here, and, you know, they might have done this in their past, but like the character doesn't know. I'm just throwing out a couple of maybes, but my character has amnesia. So if you GM want to take the maybes and twist them into a different thing, that's fine. But I still think you need to give your GM enough that they can ground you in a spot and then go from there. You can't be, because people aren't just poofed into reality one day, right? Like you are born from someone and then you have a life, right? Like you don't just pop into existence. You're not just built all of a sudden. And then even if you are built all of a sudden because you're playing a robot character in a sci-fi game, there's still information about your robot character. What lab were they made in? What model are they? What scientist designed them? What was their purpose when they were made? You know, like things don't just pop into existence out of nowhere, you know? So you don't have to go crazy with the backstory, but if you want to do the amnesia thing or the lack of a backstory thing, at least just give your GM a couple of little nuggets that they can plop in a spot. You know, just don't give them absolutely zilch, I guess is really what I'm getting at, you know?
So, okay, it's interesting. So, because I'm dealing with that right now. I'm dealing with a character who just straight up has amnesia. Mm-hmm. And when Brett had said that to me, he literally said, like, I'm trusting you with this, do something cool with it. What do you think of that idea? Of being like, I don't care what my backstory is, or like whatever you give to me, I will take, because I trust that you'll do something cool with it. What do you think of that?
I said the same thing to Joe with the rogue character, with the amnesia stuff.
Yeah. This is a little...
Because I think...
Okay.
Because I was gonna say, I think there's something worth saying because I agree with what you're saying when a character says I have amnesia, but they still have expectation, right? Like, if you're like, oh, my character has amnesia, and then you bring something up and they're like, my character wouldn't have done that. It's like, well, you don't know that. You don't know who your character was before 3 days ago, you know? And I like the idea of playing with the idea of like, oh, a character could just be completely different. Right? Like brain damage does, I was going to say wonders, but does crazy things to the brain.
I mean, yes, you are correct. I mean, there is actual real life recorded situations where people got brain damage and then woke up with entirely new skills that they had never had. Like crazy shit, like people knowing how to play the piano who had never touched an instrument in their life because of brain damage. So yes, brain damage does do crazy shit. Yeah, that's real. So yeah, with that I mean, if we're going to use the Brett example specifically. Hi, Brett.
Hello.
It's a little tricky for me to answer this because I know the person you're talking about, so it's coloring my response. So I'm trying to imagine if I like did not know Brett personally, you know?
Well, you can use me as an example, right? Because Django basically has amnesia, right? Like I have an understanding of the stuff that Django was getting up to when he had his memory back in the way back. But I don't know any of Django's friends. I don't know his commanding officer's name. I just knew the people that served at the same time. So what do you think of that?
I think Django is an example of what I was talking about, though, because you still had something to ground you to the setting, right? Because with Django, the situation with Django's amnesia is... Well, first of all, Django's amnesia, like the fact that Django doesn't remember things is partially my decision, right? Because I said, okay, so the Warforged in my setting were built a long time ago, during a war, and then they were essentially like hard drive. Their brains were like hard drive wiped after the war finished. But you still had something to ground you down because I gave you information about the Warforged, and then you said, "Oh, okay. What if I'm this like special prototype version of a Warforged that was made during the war?" Like, you know, we had a little bit of like a back and forth on that and stuff. And there's still things tying you down to the setting, right? You're a Warforged in a specific place. You were built for a specific scenario. You don't know the people you knew during that time, but you understand that you had a purpose. You were doing a thing. You were built for a reason. You know, those things are still there. So that is a example of what I'm talking about how you can do the amnesia thing. With the example you're giving me with Brett's character, so on one hand, my inclination is to say it's probably fine because, but again, this is colored by the fact that I know Brett. But
I'm
like,
colorblind.
If Brett said that to me, I probably would trust that he wouldn't get mad if I did something crazy with his backstory. You know, I know Brett as a player probably would just roll with it. You know, it would have to be pretty egregious for him not to. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So in that particular scenario with this particular person, sure, fine. If I didn't know Brett and he came to me as a first-time player and he was like, "Hey, I'm gonna just let you have my backstory. I want you to do something cool with it." I think my response would be, "Okay, I can do that. Can you just give me a couple of key bits of information that we both agree on are true, and then I will fill everything in between. I'll do whatever I want with." You know what I mean? So for example, can you just tell me where your character was born and like who their parents were, and like that's it. And your character might not even remember this information. I just want you to give that to me as a player as a solid starting point that there's no debate on, right? I want you to give me this piece of information, say, this is true, and we're agreeing on it, and this is true, we're agreeing on it. Once the game starts, I'll go buck wild, you know? Mm-hmm. I would just want those like anchor points, because those anchor points because the problem is if you don't have the anchor points, if you're like, my character has amnesia, they know nothing, they just popped into existence, it becomes like all these questions and problems come up, and it becomes this issue of it's the blank canvas problem, right? The hardest part about starting a drawing is looking at the blank page and being like, where do I start? So if you're a GM and a player comes up to you and hands you a blank piece of paper and says, draw my character, and then tells you nothing, you're like, you know, you have to be like, well, what is your character? What class are they? What this, what that? Are they a human? You know?
I mean, you could also treat them like a fish out of water type of deal, where it's like everything is new to them. So they're kind of having this experience. So
you can, but again, I still think you should have those anchor points just to give you a little something to start with. Just a little sprinkle into something, you know? Because saying, oh, my character's from this town is not even a backstory. It's just a little bit of information, right? So you can still have your, I don't want to have a backstory, but I just need something to start with as a GM. Because trying to do because again, a person doesn't pop into existence out of nothing, so it's impossible to be an entirely blank slate. And it makes my life really difficult, you know? So, yeah, like, I'm not gonna say, like, Brett was wrong or whatever, or I'm mad at Brett for doing that. But if I was in that position, that's probably what I would have said is like, all right, give me, like, one or two little things. You know?
Okay. All right, that's good. Okay. I don't disagree. What do you think, Matt?
Yeah. No, I mean, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. No, I mean, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. I agree with like the little bit of nuggets, but I don't know. I as much, even if like the fact that I've done it, I'm not a fan of the amnesia thing. Like I would rather have something, but like if a player's like, hey, I want to do a backstory, I kind of like the idea of like, you know, something tangible. even if it's like the idea that like I want to do like, what if I treat it like a fish out of water? It's like, okay, like give me like something you like here. It's like, you're new to this world. All right, you're fixated on something in this world now. You just got here. Something like you said, to ground you to the plane.
Plus, if you have those anchor points, you can do if you have those little anchor points that you know are 100% true, you can do the thing where your character like gets flashes of their old life, and you can start to fill in interesting bits of information, you know? Like, and that's literally what I've been doing with Django, right? Like when you've come across something that is relevant to what your character was up to before, I'll be like, oh, Django, you recognize this, or be like, oh, you get this bit of information about this, or you'll say to me, can I make a history check on this? And then I will say, sure, go ahead, and I will let the dice determine how much information just flows into Django's brain. So I think that's another reason to have those anchor points, is because then you can fill in those mystery questions, because you know for a fact, it's like, okay, if I know for a fact this character came from this town, then I can then fill in little bits of fun stuff in between along the way by having NPCs from that town show up and then saying to that player, you recognize this dude, but you're not sure why, you know? Because if I don't have those anchor points, I could just say that all the time and it has no meaning, you know? Like I could just be like, oh, you recognize this, you recognize that. Oh, this is interesting. Oh, this jogs your memory. Like I could just throw it out like crazy. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I can see what you're saying.
So yeah, I just get
it's okay.
I just get I get frustrated with the amnesia thing because it's kind of gotten memed on. I'm like, well, there's a way to do it, you know?
I was gonna say, like, right, like the having amnesia thing is a valid and interesting backstory plot point, but I think it comes with some contractual obligations and understandings to the story, right? If you find out that your character is like Scrimbo Bimbo the dung farmer, that's just sort of what you got to live with, right? Like you can't be mad if that's not your great epic backstory. And like, yeah, that would suck if you were literally a nobody, right?
Yeah.
But that can be interesting because you were a nobody that became a hero. So that could be cool. I think it's worth noting is one of the best tricks in my arsenal in a game with no magic for an amnesiac character is the dream sequence.
Oh yeah,
it is
of course.
All powerful. It works like a charm. And I've done it with a few characters who don't necessarily have amnesia, but who have like serious trauma. And just being able to have this, I can do literally whatever I want space for 20 minutes is such a godsend. Like I had this one player and she literally got amnesia from a lingering injury, which was really cool. Because now there's this whole thing where two characters suffer some level of memory loss, and now they can sort of confide in each other because of that memory loss and sort of deepen their bond and friendship. Or at this point, it's more like familial ties. They're more than friends. And it was really cool because the way I had set the scene up was it was instances of that character in really important times of her life. So like it was her childhood during her most traumatic time. It was her just after she had gotten out of that situation. It was another version of her a few years older, about to like join her cause a few months after that, where she's like a full-fledged member and she's got all her regalia, and then the her that existed just before she got hurt. And then the final version was her mentor, who is someone she's been looking for at this point months, who she can't find. And it was really great because obviously, you know, a character who feels lost and their parental figure's gone and you meet them again, it's like, well, where were you? And that vision had to remind her, like, I'm not who you think I'm not this person. I'm you, but you've sort of changed me to look like this. I can only tell you what you think he knows. And it was such a like powerful scene. And like, I know she, like the player teared up and I was tearing up, fighting to not, because it was just such a really cool, powerful scene, and I love that shit like no other.
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting thing to have, like amnesia halfway through. I didn't even think about that. It's
cool, like, because she lost 8 hours, right? She didn't lose that much,
right?
But she literally doesn't know what happened in the final fight,
right? Like it's enough.
Yeah, like she's completely missing the entire day of the final battle. that can leave some fucking scars, especially like if somebody dies, right? Like you blink your eyes and that person is dead. And you're covered in wounds. You're in a completely different location. You don't know what the hell happened. You don't know how many of your friends are alive. You know, like it was cool.
It's funny you mentioned that because I won't say any spoilers, but Moon Knight, there's some similar energy of that going on, and seeing that play out on a show and then you talking about it, I'm like, there is some interesting ideas there.
Oh yeah,
it's very fun.
Very good show.
Moon Knight is a very good show.
How many questions have I got through at this point? I got the first two. We kind of talked about the third question I had, which is, should there be more or less mechanical significance to your backstory? It seems like the answer across the board is more. But what we have now isn't terrible.
Okay, are you talking about backgrounds, like the mechanical design of a background, or are you saying?
Well, I mean, like I think like Heroic Chronicle counts as a mechanical backstory, right? Like, because it literally gives you things to your backstory.
Yeah,
that have mechanical ramifications.
So I do like it when games have mechanical stuff to sort of influence your background a bit, but it doesn't need to be. I don't know if it necessarily needs to be like your whole life or anything. I think the best way to do it is to have it be a little snapshot of your character. Generally, that little snapshot I think should be a year, like relatively close to before they started adventuring, right? Or doing whatever, before they started being a space pirate, whatever it is. I think you should definitely have a little mechanical influence where you take a little snapshot of like, my character was an engineer and now he works on this ship for the Galactic Federation or whatever. And so because of that, I have these little bits and bobs. But I don't necessarily want your backstory to be like a hyper mechanical thing. Although Burning Wheel does kind of do that, and it is interesting in that game. So it's not impossible, but it does definitely, it should matter somehow, because it does suck. I mean, something that is sucky, like with 5e in particular, is, oh, I take a background and I get this background feature, and it just doesn't really come up or do anything. And it's like, that is shitty, you know? It is fun to be able to do something with that stuff. So
yeah, I mean, I think like a good game where I feel like I was happy with the way that the implementation was done was actually Blades in the Dark, right? Because when you play the whatever the bounty hunter playbook is, right? It says like you have like an animal companion from your time when you were like in the service or doing your whatever your profession was, right? You have like an animal.
Yeah.
And you have like signature guns that you use. You have like just some like accoutrement that you keep with you from your time in the service.
Right.
I really liked that because it literally said you don't have default kit. You have a very specialized kit that you have garnered over years of active service. And to me, I was like, that's cool because it treats it as if it is a core mechanic, and I like that.
Yeah, I mean, it should be a core mechanic, I think. I don't think background stuff that like in terms of game design, I do not think backgrounds should be treated as a side mechanic. I do think they should be a core mechanic.
I agree,
because it just doesn't make any sense to make it a side thing. You know,
Matt, any thoughts? I feel like I want to hear Matt's thoughts on this, and he's just like, yeah,
No, sorry, the XP smoothie hitting real hard today. No, yeah, I mean, I don't know, because kind of why I brought up the whole like Xanathar guide stuff or like the Wildmount stuff, where it's like and kind of like what I said in the beginning of the show, like I feel like backgrounds are fine. I feel like they're good at the place at the moment, and like again, Wizards are starting to throw shit on the wall and see what sticks, like with the backgrounds, or it's like adding feats, adding spells, see what these backgrounds give you is like a little bit extra. But I think it's fine. And again, I think we mentioned this too in another podcast. Some of that stuff in the backgrounds, it is player facing. So sometimes it's up to the player to bring it out. Like my lizard folk wizard man. I forgot what background I think he has the Outlander one because he's a lizard man. So it makes sense for him to go out and forage for like food and stuff. And like as a wizard, it's like, well, that's weird. But like as a lizard folk, it's just funny. It's just normal. It's like, yep, there he goes, hunting squirrels again, foraging for berries again. But like, I can understand it where it's like, I took the sailor background and we're playing in the desert campaign. I'm never gonna use this feature. And it's like, all right, bro, it's kind of on you for picking the sailor background when the DM specifically told you not to do that.
Yeah, it is. You're right in that it's a player-facing thing to a degree, but there can also be the situation where the GM didn't give you enough information, or maybe the GM wasn't even sure what direction they were going to go in, and then you picked a background that didn't end up being relevant, and both parties didn't know that was going to be the case, and so it's like no matter what you do, your background feature is not going to come up. You know, it's.
I actually think that'd be kind of cool, and obviously this is very much like you need to work. This has to be a very specific kind of campaign, very specific GM. But like if you took the sailor background in like a desert campaign, and you had like Avatar: The Last Airbender styled sand surfers or sand sailors, that would be cool as shit.
That'd be interesting.
And you could potentially invent some lore for your GM. Be like, oh, are like sand sailors a thing? And you know, the GM could be like, oh, that's really cool. I didn't thought about that before. Yeah, I think that'd be neat as fuck. I that's so cool. I might want to try that one day. Just straight up.
Yeah. I will say one thing. Not that I want to be like the shit on 5e Brigade again. Yes, Wizards is trying to make backgrounds a little more relevant more recently with some of their newer stuff like Strixhaven and the Heroes of Krynn and all that. However, the way they're going about it does kind of feel like the design is kind of patchworky. They're like, well, what if we tack on this one mechanic from the other part of the game and tack it onto this mechanic and sort of cobble them together, and that makes the backgrounds more relevant. It's like, yeah, you can. I don't know if it's the best way to tackle it, though. I feel like you should maybe just consider redesigning the situation a little bit, you know?
Well, I think, so originally Jeremy Crawford, I think, mentioned this in an interview where he's like, specifically when it comes to the backgrounds and like the Ravnica setting, they give you spells because of the backgrounds, or there's 10 backgrounds for each guild. Yeah. And if you join a guild, you get special spells. They specifically did that because they're like, we want to make the Magic the Gathering settings unique, so we're gonna mess around with the backgrounds and make backgrounds unique for those settings. But now they're starting to implement that with this background you pick gives you a free feat at level 1, and that feat is very much tied to the setting. And then now with Heroes of Krynn coming out, same thing. It's like these backgrounds are very much tied to the setting, which will give you a feat very much tied to the setting.
Yeah, but that feels like, my point is that feels like kind of a little bit of a half-assed, like, quick fix. It doesn't feel like you're getting at the core of the issue.
Right. I think the guild thing was a very cool idea. I think that if they kind of went with that more than the free feat, I think honestly they're trying with the background feat thing. They're trying to, I don't remember if I mentioned this in the feat episode. I think they're trying to solve the issue of literally everybody and their mother has the homebrew rule of free feat at level 1, and Wizards are like, well, how do we implement that in our rules? Oh, I know. We'll just attach it to the backgrounds. And it's like, or Wizards, you just make it a rule and you do something else with the backgrounds.
I mean,
because it does feel like patchworky, like Josh said. Sorry, I didn't mean to. I just wanted to add the last bit.
In 5e's defense, it does feel patchworky, but I do like that it might be blasphemous to say this, but I like that it sort of feels experimental. It feels to me like they're actively trying to fix this thing that people might consider wrong or incomplete. So the fact that they're willing to try several different methods and see which one works. Like, people could argue like, oh, well, now you're making me pay for the different methods. I don't care about that. I think if you can come up with the system that works and it's the best that it can be, I don't mind potentially paying for some iterations in case I want to try to take some of those bits and add them in somewhere else. You know what I mean?
Well, you don't even the funny thing is you actually aren't necessarily even paying for the iterations, because the UA stuff they give out for free, and that's where a lot of these iterations start anyway. So
true.
But yeah, that's a good point, actually. The fact that they are willing to do something that's a little clunky just to try it out for the sake of like experimenting, Yeah, I guess it is. That is kind of a good sign that they're willing to do something like that. Yeah, you have an interesting point there. I hadn't necessarily considered that. Yeah, because I was thinking about it from the angle of, well, just redesign how backgrounds function kind of from the ground up. But the idea that they're sort of throwing out iterations and trying some kind of weird stuff to potentially land at a better solution than they would have on their own is an interesting thought. And that they're crowdsourcing the design a little bit, which is interesting. So yeah,
like I said, I think that's pretty sick.
Yeah, it's a little video gamey almost, because
that
idea
with 5.5, 5e enhance,
Matt,
whatever coming out in 2
over
years.
this every time. It is 5.5e Turbo Redux Enhanced Omega Max Alpha Plus Edition. God.
No, I don't think it will.
Sir, may I ask you to Ligma. Fuck that.
I'm just gonna keep doing it. Eventually, no, you know what? Never mind. I'll just write some ideas down in the background. Continue.
Sick. Wizards of the Coast, hire me. Josh doing those let me in
Let me in.
on the gates.
Hell yeah.
I have all these names.
What other questions that I had to ask?
Wait, hold on. I feel like Matt was something about.
Were you?
5.
I'm sorry.
Something
What?
about
No,
5.5.
No, I said it. I said it was their playtest, like you're saying, like the playtest stuff. They're experimenting because they have 2 more years until the next edition comes out.
You're saying they're fucking around with the
they're fucking
intention
around now.
of the final version being in the 5.5 quote unquote. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I feel like community wise, we probably should stop calling it 5.5 because I feel like it's not going to be what we think it is. But
Well, I keep actually calling it 5e, and people are actually starting to like it. So-
I don't think the thing is I don't the way that Wizards has been handling the branding of D&D recently. I don't think they're going to call it anything. I think they're just going to drop new updated books and say, here's the new updated books. It's still it's called D&D and that's it. Like, I don't think they're going to attach any moniker to it at all.
Well, they said it's going to be a new edition that is compatible with 5e. So would they, like, I think we joked about this, like, on the side where it's like, well, they can call it 5e enhanced. They go at 5.5. They can call it 5 version 2.0.
Here's the thing.
Or they can call it 6th edition, and then it's literally just 5 edition, updated.
I don't think they're going to call it any of that. I think they're just going to say, here's D&D 5e Player's Handbook 2, and that's it. I don't think they're going to call it any of that. They're just going to be like, here's the revised Player's Handbook. That's it. Because they have I don't know if you guys have noticed, so they have literally dropped the 5th edition. They have dropped it from all their marketing. They just call it D&D. They do not denote edition anywhere on anything anymore. So I think
I have no idea.
Yeah.
I've not noticed that.
Start looking around. I forget who. Someone pointed it out and or mentioned it, and I started looking. I was like, oh yeah, they're just not mentioning the edition anymore. So I think they're taking it. They're sort of handling it the way a video game would, where it's like, you have Guilty Gear Season 1, Guilty Gear Season 2, Guilty Gear Season 3, but it's all Guilty Gear Strive. They don't rename it or redux it or anything anymore because in the modern age, you don't have to do all that anymore. Back in the day, you got Street Fighter 2, Street Fighter 2 Turbo, Street Fighter 2 Turbo Plus, but you don't have to do that anymore. You just put out a patch or a season and you just update the game, and it's the same game though. You don't rebrand it or rename it. So I think they're doing that.
So you think with kind of like how they used to call it Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, you think they might just change it to Dungeons and Dragons and then just leave it at that?
I think the rewritten Player's Handbook is just going to have a fancy name. Like it's going to be, the Volo's Player Handbook Extravaganza. And they're just going to be like, here's the new book. Here you go. And that's it. And they're not going to make a big scene about this is the new edition or this is 5.5 or any of that. They're going to do what they did with the most recent Mordenkainen book, right? They didn't say, here's the new version of the Monster Manual. They just said, here's a new book. It's Mordenkainen's Presents Monsters of the Multiverse, and it replaces these old books. That's it. They put out a patch. They put out a big season patch. That's what they did. They did the video game thing and put out a big patch. You know? And even video games will often give big patches. They will give them names, you know? It'll be like, this is the whatever patch. For example, Final Fantasy, every major patch will have a name that's relevant to the story. So the most recent patch of Final Fantasy 14 was 6.1, A New Adventure Unfolds. That's the name, but the game is still Final Fantasy 14. So, yeah. Anyway, that was a little bit of a weird tangent, but it was just
a little bit. Yeah, Josh with the fighting game tangents. They yeah.
I brought in 14 too. It wasn't just a fighting game.
True.
It's just I use fighting games in that because fighting games used to do that a lot, so it's a good example. Like that's where the joke of like slapping more words onto the title comes. That literally comes from fighting games. You know. Anyway, you can take us back.
What are the questions that I have? Oh, here's a. So I think this kind of leads me to my biggest question, because we've actually cleared out the rest of them.
Did we?
Oh, actually, no, there's two.
Right.
And they sort of go hand in hand. The first question is, how much influence should a backstory have on a game in question? And kind of comboing off of that, how much work, if any, should a GM do to implement that story into the game? And by that I mean, if someone's backstory is just wildly out of place for the game in question, right? If you're playing a game in feudal Japan, like during the Meiji Revolution, where there's, you know, where the samurai is sort of becoming extinct and you're seeing a lot more industrialization, and then you have, yes, my Egyptian pharaoh king, like, how much work should you do to try to fit that in? But let's go with the first one first, right? Like, how much influence do you think that any one given game should have, or one given backstory should have on a game, if any?
All right. Are you ready? Are you ready for the Omega answer? I don't know if you're ready for this.
Sure.
It depends.
Fantastic.
I know that's the shitty answer.
Backstory, cool.
Matt, were you about?
Oh, I thought you were going to continue. I was waiting.
No. It looked like you had
I think it. Yeah, I mean, yeah. Honestly, it does depend, because it's like, all right, how many players do you have in the game? How much backstory did they give you? What can you take out and use and implement in your world for locations, quests, NPCs, all that stuff? Because you might have a player like in my game, a lot of my players had like backgrounds specifically tied to certain like locations and cities and places. So like, I would be like, all right, so a majority of their bit is going to be when they go there. And then they go there and then they have their quests and adventures tied around that player. But I guess, would I have it tied to, like, I don't know if the campaign has an overarching story, like you can, and like you can tie like the players into it so they are personally more invested. But it depends. I feel like a cop-out saying that, but like it does kind of depend on the campaign you're running. Because if it's like, you're playing Tyranny of Dragons and you roll up with Yorl the Turtle, fucking turtle barbarian, and he has absolutely nothing to do with dragons, you know, it's like, I don't know how to help you, buddy. I mean, like, a turtle's like a dragon, right? They're reptiles. It's fine. We'll figure it out.
Turtles, dragons, those are basically the same thing, I think.
Yeah, so it's like one of those things where, yeah, it, like, honestly, it does, like Josh said, it does kind of depend on the campaign, but I think you can influence the game.
So to give an actual answer and so this I'm essentially extrapolating on it depends here, but to give a something of substance, I think the thing that it should depend on is workload. If you have a player who comes to you and says, my backstory is I'm a turtle barbarian from Chult who used to raise velociraptors, and I've come here to the Sword Coast to fuck up Tiamat because she stole my favorite muffins. Then, sorry, chum, your backstory is not going to have a lot of influence on the campaign because you didn't put a lot of work in to make it matter. But if you have a player who comes to you and says, okay, so I'm thinking about playing a Dragonborn, and I was potentially considering being a Paladin. Does it make sense if I am a Dragonborn Paladin of Bahamut and that I was given a direct quest to go against Tiamat? And I heard about the cult because of my teacher, who is, my master who taught me how to be a Paladin. He has a direct connection with Bahamut. Heard about this cult situation, sent me on, and then you say, okay, well, you couldn't have heard about the cult because the cult is secret. However, perhaps you got sent to the city here for this reason, right? Your GM comes back with like that in response. And then you as a player say, okay, what if I also add this part of it? So if the player goes out of their way to have the back and forth with you as a GM, to work their character in and actively cooperates with you, that player's backstory gets to have a lot of influence on the campaign because you put the work in. You took the time to make your backstory have influence. You worked with me to get it in there because obviously you wanted your backstory to matter, so we cooperated on it. But if you just wrote some shit down and then never tell me about it and then expect me to or tell me barely anything about it, and you don't go out, you don't put any effort in to work it into the situation, then sorry, but you can't expect me to shoehorn your backstory in. You know what I mean? I'm not gonna, if you don't care, I don't care is I guess basically what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. To give a very direct example, Isaiah, with your character, Django, you were like, okay, I want to play this crazy, high-tech, Magitech, Warforged, soldier dude. And I'm like, all right, cool. Here's how Warforged function. And you were like, okay, can I be this, sort of high-tech prototype situation? And I go, okay, yeah, sure. Here's how that would work. X, Y, and Z situation. And then you said, how much information do I remember? And I say very little, but you'll be able to make checks along the way to fill that information in later. And then I will potentially give you, major story beats that'll give you big chunks or whatever. And we had that back and forth. And because we had that back and forth, Django's backstory has a pretty hefty influence on a chunk of the campaign, right? A specific facet of the campaign, which is the war that happened a long time ago. Django has a relation to that. Django has an influence on that. I will make decisions around the fact that Django is present. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Because you took that time to do that cooperation with me. And then Ant didn't do as much of that, so Kai's backstory doesn't have as much influence. Now, there's still some stuff that Ant gave me, so there's still something there, but I think, it's directly proportional to how much work you're doing with me. That's basically how I look at it.
Yeah. Okay.
What
about you, Isaiah? Sorry.
I'm pretty much of the same mind, to be honest, right? If a player, because I've said this before, several players in my game have literally said, my character has a backstory, but it's never going to come up, so I'm just not going to tell you what it is. And, I'm that befuddled the shit out of me. I'm not even going to play.
Yeah, and that's a little much, I will admit.
It's a little crazy. And I've tried to be encouraging and be like, hey man, even if you don't want it to come up, I can you at least throw me your backstory so I could give you some backstory specific loot, or maybe some NPCs can come to look for your characters. And one character is nah, it's whatever, I don't give a shit. I'm like, okay, all right.
Yeah, I mean, at least let me mention your fucking mother's name in passing or something.
Yeah, but hey, that's what she wants. That's what she wants. She, I told her you're gonna be missing out on some stuff, and she was like, that's fine. All right, cool. And then, Ant, I hate to call you out. I usually call you by your screen name. I didn't. Fuck. But yeah, LP is usually I'll give you my backstory, and then it's hey, bud, you got that backstory? Still writing it. I'm like, all right, cool. I'm gonna get an encyclopedia. I bet money. But yeah, it just I haven't gotten them yet, and there is this sort of mutual understanding that their backstories are not going to be as relevant than people who gave me thoughts or people who gave me something like actual written backstory that we like came up together. Like I know 2 players, the one who had the amnesia and the one who plays the like Firebird Native American tribe. We literally worked together like in a private chat for like 2 or 3 hours, hashing out some fine details and like putting them in Google Docs.
Put the work in.
Yeah. and that was great. It was fun, and it's really cool to have those things come up, and for them to be plot relevant, and for the characters and players to have like a true drive to want to interact with the story and change the story based on their actions. That's my favorite shit.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good way to sort of like measure and or gauge what you're, it's an indicator for what your player wants too, right? Because if the player says, I'm not going to give you a lot of information, don't worry about it, then okay, this player does not care about that facet of the game, right? So I don't need to stress over it. So it's good because on both ends of the spectrum, the player who works with you and gives you a lot of information, the player who doesn't work with you and gives you very little, you're being told how those 2 people want the game to be played for them. You're getting information on both of them, and okay, for player A, I don't need to worry about like tying them into the scenario, and for player B, I should think about tying them into the scenario. So it lets you allocate your workload, and that that's good because that makes prepping easier. When prepping is it's not that you're prepping less, but where to allocate that prep work time. So it's helpful. And the idea of my character has a backstory, but don't fucking worry about it, that's a little odd, but I guess if they really, really, truly don't care, then c'est la vie.
Yeah.
Baguette?
I don't know.
C'est la vie. Baguette Americans.
And canceled by the French.
I am French, they can't cancel me. You want some croissants?
I'm fucking crying.
What are these showers? No le douche in this country.
Oh my god, Matt, what are your thoughts on the 2 questions?
I mean, I think I kind of piggybacked a little bit off Josh's. It depends with the whole influence thing. But like, how much work should a GM do? I definitely like definitely working with your GM on the backstory and on something implementing into the game. Because there are certain things, like as DMs, like we don't want to like give the plot away or like fucking, hey, so this is like the bad guy and this is his plan. But like, hey, this is probably like some of the enemies you guys might be facing. These are some of the places you guys might be going in the campaign world. So it's just like, here's, like what kind of story can we work on together? And that's definitely like something like a session 0, maybe one-on-one like you guys are doing with the players, working out some kind of like idea for backstories and things that your characters would want to do in the world.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's funny. My response was answering the question of how much influence should the character's backstory have, but thinking about it, I also answered how much work should the GM do at the exact same time. So
you did, yeah, because we talked about like the whole Tortle and Chult thing and being like, if your story has nothing to do with my game, that's not a whole lot I can do for you.
Yeah, I didn't mean to answer both questions at the same time. I guess I'm just that fucking big brain.
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna sort of to go into that as well, Matt. Like, how much, if you have a player who's really into a certain character idea or something like that, and it just has so little to do with your campaign, are you usually willing to be like, okay, like I'll see what I can do. Let's see where I can bend things here or there, or rewrite something here or there to sort of slot things in? Or are you more of the, Bud, I appreciate that you did all this work, but you're gonna have to realize like this is most likely not gonna come up?
I think I did, like, I threw my players a bone here and there, and I was like, all right, because like with the big campaign, most of my players started off from the beginning and then they kind of jumped in between. So some players hopped in, they knew the situation that was going on, and then kind of build some characters, mostly to round out the party and then kind of like aid them in the campaign story. Where some people, you know, they just kind of like some players were really gung-ho about the campaign, and like one of my players was a high elf gunslinger, the Matt Mercer one, and he specifically made his character fitting into the war. Then another buddy who literally just was like, yeah, I just want to I don't know, I just want to play I just want to play a wild magic sorcerer, and I'm looking for a friend, I think. I don't remember.
A friend.
I'm looking for my long lost brother.
Where's my homeboy at?
Yeah, I'm looking for him. And I'm like, your long lost brother. Okay. Is he dealing with anything of the campaign? Nope. Does he know anybody in the party? Nope. Does he have any sort of relevance to anything we're doing? No, man. I think he's just gonna show up and join the party.
Nice. Nice.
And I'm like, okay, bud. I'll fucking see what I can do, I fucking guess.
Yeah, see, that's an example for me. That's an example of you're not putting a lot of effort in for me, so I'm gonna put minimal and or equal effort for you, you know?
Yeah, and I think I ended up doing that as a DM because I was like, listen, he gave me nothing, so I'm just gonna be like, listen, you show up, the party's in dire straits, you know,
your
friendly
friend
NPC picks you out of a hat, go save them. That's it.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know, I'm just looking for my friend. It's like, all right, your friend is one of the prisoners of war because he was on one of the sides. That's it, you know, like,
yeah,
that's what you get, you know?
Yeah.
And if you're, and again, if you as a player are okay with that, then we're good. You know, like it doesn't necessarily have to be a negative thing. Like as long as both parties are like fine with it, then it's good. You know, it's that whole, talk to your players, consent as a GM and all that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it might sound like I'm being negative about that scenario. It doesn't necessarily have to be negative. I'm just sort of being very matter of fact about it, I guess.
Right. It's also like, I guess when it comes to like the character creation thing, because I kind of mentioned this because I'm about to start up a Strixhaven campaign for my players. So I'm finally going to get back in the GM hot seat. And I specifically told them like, hey guys, all right, so when we're making our characters, make a character that wants to go to a magic school, is going to a magic school for a reason.
Yeah, make a character who has to go to school for something.
Right, because in the Icewind Dale game, I was the only person who kind of made, or at least I feel it this way, I could be wrong, but I felt like I was the only person who made a character specifically for Icewind Dale.
Yeah.
I made a Goliath. I made him, fucking Goliaths are all over Icewind Dale. I made him specifically tied to an NPC that has something to do with like one of the big events, I guess, in the book. Whereas everybody else seemed to be characters who came out from like, because they even mentioned like, you can make a character who's not from Icewind Dale and they can come from the Sword Coast or whatever, but then they're locked in Icewind Dale because of the events that are going on in the campaign. And that's fine.
Yeah.
But I felt like me and I think one other player, who the other player was also built a character from Icewind Dale, but what his character was doing didn't really fit with like the campaign like setting, like the cold and the like survival and all that. So it's kind of one of those things where definitely like ahead of time, as a dungeon master, tell your players like, yo, build the character for our campaign, for this campaign, because you know otherwise it's like this is gonna help me. It's gonna help me to help you.
Yeah, okay. That's what it is, right? Help me to help you that's kind of what it comes down to.
Yeah, I mean, I think for myself, I thankfully have not run into this all that much, right? Where like a character, excuse me, yawning again. Where a character just completely doesn't fit into the mold, and that's kind of why I wanted to ask that question, is because I, as someone who's never dealt with that, because you know I've been DMing for far fewer amount of time than you guys have, it seems like an interesting thought experiment to like see if people on average do more work, are you willing to do more, willing to do less, stuff like that. I don't really think there's a right answer for that. I think if a player was super enthusiastic about a story that they wanted to tell with a character, even if that character didn't fit, I would at least give it some genuine thought as to how I could fit a character into a storyline as seamlessly as possible, you know?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is if a player is really genuinely enthusiastic about their character, then I feel like they will be willing to adjust their character to really fit in, you know? Like if they're super hype about a character, then presumably they care enough to do the work to make them fit, you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, of course. I think it goes both ways, right? Because it's like, oh, well, like, I'm willing to try to fit your character in, but where you're also gonna have to make some concessions, right? Like, are you fine?
Right, concessions on both sides.
It's like, are you fine if your character isn't the crown prince? Maybe he's like
related to the crown prince.
Yeah, or he's like the heir to like a lordship. Maybe he has some land somewhere in the kingdom, but he doesn't own the kingdom itself. Yeah. Or if you can do something a little bit more modern, it's like, oh, all right, well, are you fine if your character isn't like the top 1%, right? Like, right. Maybe he owns an apartment in Manhattan, but he's not living in the penthouse, right? Or, you know, maybe his dad isn't the son of like a 5-star general. He was like, his dad was like an officer in the military, which is why he has like military training.
Yeah, it's that thing where, you know, a player is like, oh, my character is a noble lord from one of the 5 main houses, and you go, well, we can't really do that because the 5 main houses are the antagonists of the entire story. So like, there's no good, easy way for me to time it. So maybe you're part of like a minor house, you know, like you do that kind of thing.
Or you're a defactor of the main house.
Or you're like,
something like that, yeah. I just kind of thought of this for like a second, like pulling the Critical Role like thing. Keyleth's whole backstory like has a built-in quest into it. It's like I'm off on a journey to go and complete this thing called an Armente, and it's all about the 4 elements, and it's all trials and shit. And it's like, oh, that's so smart. It's like, damn, that's actually like a really cool thing. Like telling like implement where it's like, hey, Dungeon Master, I built in a quest line from my backstory for it. So and it's like, it's like neat.
With the Keyleth example specifically, it is cool. That is a cool idea to sort of be like, oh, there's a quest tied to my backstory, so you as the DM have something very tangible to lock onto. There is this sort of, I don't know if I want to call it a problem per se, but there's the thing to take into account that if you are saying my backstory has a quest attached to it, you know, I'm trying to get the 7 Dragon Balls, then ergo there's going to be a quest to get the 7 Dragon Balls and we have to find them. You are saying to the GM, hey GM, some of your prep sessions are going to have to work in my thing, even if you were not necessarily intending and or care about my thing, you know? So there could be a little bit of a friction with that specific scenario, right? Like, for example, Critical Role spoilers, if we're just, if we're worried about that. Keyleth goes to the volcano to fight the Fire Ashari as like the trial for that. And let's say Matt really just was like, I really want to focus on the Chroma Conclave stuff right now. Like, I don't have time for your Ashari nonsense. Like, I'm not that interested in it. And he's like, but I kind of have to force the Armente stuff in there somewhere because she made it part of her thing. I guess I'll shoehorn it in here. And then it gets kind of like lackluster. And I'm not obvious. I don't think that's what happened, but there is that possibility, and that's worth being aware of, I guess. It's not necessarily a good or a bad, but I do think it's worth being aware of.
Yeah, I kind of disagree with you there, in the sense of that a GM kind of has to do that, like, irregardless, right? Your players are going to do things and are potentially going to be interested in things that you might not particularly care about all that much. I don't think that's a cause for friction, right? Like,
well, it's specifically the quest part, because if you as a player say, I have to go on a quest to unite the 4 elements, that means the GM has to make a, well, they don't have to obviously, but assuming they're humoring your backstory, right? That means the GM has to make a quest where you unite the 4 elements and you have or you fight elementals or whatever. But this is
something. I'm sorry. No. What were you gonna say?
What?
I was gonna say this is something also like you work with the GM, because if you just throw in like
you should.
I guess
definitely.
if you just throw it in, then the GM's gonna be like, all right, shit, what the fuck? I have to make this 4 element nonsense.
Right. The thing
but
I'm
if you
getting
like talk to GM and be like, hey, I have this idea for this trial. What do you think? And then they can be like, I have 4 locations you can go to.
Yeah. Well, I guess the thing I'm getting at is when you make it a specific quest, then you are narrowing the scope of what the GM can do with your backstory a little bit, because it has to, if the GM wants to include your backstory, they have to include this quest thing at some point, right? Whereas if you just say, my character's a noble and he's related to the families that are our enemy, the GM can slot that in anywhere along the way in whatever fashion he wants, because you're just saying I'm tied to them, not that you have to do a specific action. When it becomes a quest, that's a specific action. That's the main difference I'm getting at. I'm not saying it's guaranteed to be bad. I'm just saying it's worth considering that possibility of your GM might be a little annoyed by that, or could be,
I don't know. I feel like if it's something that's discussed at the beginning, kind of piggybacking off what Matt said, I don't think it's that much of a problem when a GM knows, like, okay, right, they are given an outline for the quest, right? It's like, okay, I have to unite the 4 elements. If the whole thing, right, and we're going to continue this Avatar analogy, is like, you have to defeat the bad guy by the time that the comet shows up, right? You sort of know, okay, well, at this point, I have to sort of hit these plot beats within this time scale. You're already thinking about it anyway. Right? Like, I don't think you have to do all that much more work in that instance of being like, I don't want friction to occur. I think in the sense, just having characters who don't like perfectly match the setting in the way that you thought they would at the start is about as much friction as you're going to get, and everything else sort of either comes with it or is softened by it,
Yeah, I guess I was just assuming the scenario where you as the player planned out what your quest is going to be already, and then you hand it to the GM. I guess that's the scenario I was picturing, and that's why I was like, oh, that could potentially be like, if you write up a backstory and you specifically say, my quest is I must defeat the Dark Lord, and the GM
avenge my father to grab his Vorpal sword and slay him with it.
It's like, I must defeat the Dark Lord. Like, that is my quest, and I want that to be worked in because of my backstory. If the GM never had any intention of you fighting the Dark Lord, now they're being shoehorned in a direction they were not initially planning, right? But if you just say, oh, I want to, I have some kind of important idea for a quest, and you work with it, you work with your GM back and forth, that's fine. I was thinking about the scenario of the player comes to you with the quest preordained already. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I am kind of talking about that though, right? Like even if you didn't originally believe that like the ultimate Dark Lord, right? If Satan wasn't the main bad guy, he still doesn't have to be, right? Like, if the Dark Evil Lord is like, let's just say he's like this powerful warrior that can't be beat, right? It's like, okay, well, maybe he's not the main bad guy, but maybe he's actually Lord Soth, the Death Knight, who is like working for the main bad guy, and the big bad can be the big bad after all. This guy is just the next tier, right? Because like you see that a lot in shows where the bad guy of the first few seasons is just the henchman of the big bad.
Yeah.
So like it can work, and I don't think it's just that much. I think it's a little, I don't want to use the word ingenuity, but it's a willingness to sort of piggyback
Yeah,
right?
I'm not saying it can't work. I'm just saying if you're a player who does that, be aware that you may have put a little bit of because when you do that, it's almost like you're prepping for your GM, right? Like you're almost kind of prepping a session for them or a couple of sessions for them. So if you're going to do that, just be aware that you could put a little wrinkle in the GM's sort of plan or just generally put a wrinkle in what the GM wanted to do, and just be aware of it is really all I'm saying. Like, I'm not saying you can't do it or it's definitely going to be a problem. Just sort of be aware that it could cause a disturbance in the force.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah, I can see that.
You know, because it is kind of weird to like prep for your GM, right? Like that's kind of a weird thing because the social contract we've agreed on is that's not generally how it works. So if you're sort of adjusting the contract, it's just like be aware of it, I guess.
Well, I don't know about all that. I think, personally speaking, if a player preps a session for me,
right? No, I agree. I do think that is an interesting idea to have like a player almost sort of prep a session for you, but not everyone will necessarily be on board of that because of the way the culture is at the moment, you know?
Do you really think that the culture is so one-sided? I feel like is the only phrase I can think of.
No, I don't think it's a thing where it's one-sided. I just think it's a thing where everyone, when they start playing, this is more of a thing when you're like early on, right? When they start playing, they have a preconceived notion of sort of what the social contract is and how things are supposed to work and whose job is what, right? So like, for example, players will often, like newer players, will often not be willing to make declarative statements about the setting because in their mind, they feel like, well, what I understand is the social contract here is that's not my job. I don't do that. That's what the GM does, right? So a player might have a cool idea that they could declare about the setting via their character, but they won't do it because they're like, oh, I'm not allowed to do that, right? Because of certain assumptions they've made. So similarly, I think some people who are GMing, if a player hands them some sort of a backstory quest, that person who's GMing might be like, well, session prepping is what I do, not what you do. So I kind of don't like that you like prepped a session for me because that's not how I thought this worked. Now, again, later down the road, when you become, when you become more comfortable with both sides of the table, this is really less of a thing, which is why it works well on Critical Role because Matt, as a GM, knew what he was doing. He's a veteran GM, so it's not really an issue for him. But particularly early on, I think there's certain assumptions people make about the flow of things. And if you disrupt it, all I'm saying is there's potential for your GM to be like, wait, what the fuck's happening? You know, like, what are we doing? Hold on. You know what I mean?
Yeah, kinda. Yeah, I think this is one of those. I struggle to see this as much of a problem as I guess maybe potentially it could be.
I'm not saying it's a huge problem.
No. What you're saying is it could potentially result in a problem, and I think I struggle seeing that point of view because my first gut reaction is, go on, Matt. No. Go finish your thing. I'll afterwards. My first gut reaction is just communicate, right? Like,
I mean, that's always the answer.
Yeah, like because it really is like it is sort of the be all end all, right? Like if you as the GM are unhappy that the players keep giving you plot points that they expect you to hit for them, and you don't say anything about it, you're just annoyed, and it sort of mulls in the back of your brain until you get to a point where you're like, you know, why am I even doing this? That's a huge problem. And it goes vice versa, right? If the GM is just forcing you into situations where you feel like you have no agency, but you never speak out against it, that's also a problem. So you have to speak out against those things. Even if you don't want to be confrontational about it, you need to be like, hey, I just feel like maybe that meeting with the character's uncle that I didn't know existed and I wrote the story maybe shouldn't have happened. You know, like,
Yeah.
I just think it's we were just talking about this before recording, right? Where like people make bold statements, but are often unwilling to hold as true to them as potentially they could because they're being confronted about them.
Yeah, yeah. Communication is always the answer. I guess the thing I'm just sort of getting at is like, I don't know, be aware of it. You know?
Yeah,
I think, I think it would be weird if like a player just came up to you and was like, "Hey man, so here's my backstory thing. I made this entire dungeon for my character's backstory." It's like, "Oh, cool. Wait, you made this? So you know where everything is, including the special MacGuffin, right?" Yeah. Okay. Well, I literally cannot use this fucking dungeon you made.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the thing I'm saying is even like that is an even weirder scenario you just posited, Matt. But
right, that's what I'm saying. Like, there's certain lines where it's like, I feel like it's okay, and then certain ones where it's like, I made this whole dungeon for you.
Yeah,
it's like,
yo, if a player said, "Hey,
cool,
I made this dungeon for you," I'd be like, "Thank God, I fucking hate running dungeons." And then like, I know where everything is. I'm gonna go, "Oh no, you don't." It's like, wait, no, but they're right there. I'm like, no, they won't be. Don't worry.
Yeah. I guess the I'm just saying is, if you're a player, right? If you're a newer player, I'm mostly talking to newer players with this. If you're a newer player and you build a quest into your backstory, and then you present said quest to your GM, and then your GM's reaction is, okay, I'm not 100% sure what I'm gonna do with that. And like, they're not immediately on board. Don't be surprised. You know what I mean? Like, don't be shocked or surprised that if that goes down is, kind of what I'm getting at, because it wasn't something they had in mind before, because you're the one who came up with it. So I don't know. I always be aware of the, I don't even know, like always be aware of the social cues, I guess. I couldn't phrase that. There's probably a better way for me to put that, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying. I don't even really know how you'd be able to do it other than some serious communication. Like
yeah.
There's a serious lack of social understanding if you're like, I don't see why this isn't a problem. I made the quest for them. I made the dungeon for them. I did all this work for them, and they're just not going to use it. It's like, well,
yeah, you're not picking up on what they're putting down if you don't see the problem.
yeah, seriously.
I mean, that could be its own. That's its own topic too, right? Like the idea of the social and emotional intelligence, and how you have to utilize that at a table to inform what's going on, and like. There's a lot there. There's a lot to unpack there.
What are your guys' favorite like backgrounds from 5e? Just in general, like, have you? I don't know how many you guys have actually seen.
I've barely looked at them.
I've hold on. Let me pull up. Let me pull up my resource that I will not name by name.
Or I guess, which ones have you guys used that you particularly found, I don't know, interesting, or that you liked?
I honestly, I just use the for 5e. I just use the backgrounds as like a little bit of extra backstory flavoring, and then I kind of forget about them. Like Zigzax was an entertainer, and all I did with that was like, oh, he was part of the circus. Oh, he did sword tricks because he's a College of Swords bard, and like that was it. I didn't really like do a whole lot more with it, so I don't think about them very much, to be honest. Like they're there. They add a little flavor.
Let's see. I've so far I've used
I definitely don't remember what I've used.
Just going through it, like the Baldur's Gate one that we did for Descent into Avernus. I used the setting specific one for that. I've used Entertainer. I've used Faceless.
Wait. What was the Baldur's Gate specific one? I don't remember that being.
Or remember each. So for Baldur's Gate, they did something cool where they took like the backgrounds from the player's handbook, and then they kind of like changed some of the features so that it revolves more around Baldur's Gate. Even though fucking the Baldur's Gate part of I'm not gonna say anything.
It's okay. Yes, we know, man.
Fraggle.
Descent into Avernus is very fun, but it's not a Baldur's Gate adventure.
Oh yeah, sorry. That one is Faceless. That's the one I picked. That was for pause. Faceless is what the background I chose.
That makes sense.
So yeah, I've used Criminal. I've used Criminal Spy. I've used Faceless, Entertainer. I've done Gambler. Let's see. I've done Sailor, Outlander, Soldier, Silver Quill Student. But that one was more for like a one shot, just because it gave me some cool things.
Oh yeah,
Sage is fun.
Didn't you use the Silver Quill Student on an Uncle Ismos?
Yes.
Yeah.
Give me some cool cantrips.
I'm sorry. No, what were you saying?
No, I was just gonna say I feel like we'll have to talk about my little side adventure idea at some point.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea.
Yeah, I don't think it's been very successful, but you know. Anyway.
I definitely want to use the Celebrities Adventurer Scion, where you are the child of a very powerful like adventurer. So it's like you have the baggage of like your parent, being, I don't know, like Ganondorf or some other like very famous like person. And you're just like, God damn it, Dad, fucking.
You're Frodo's grandkid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I kind of like that though. I'm gonna be real.
Yeah, I think it'd be funny. Like I think it's like super cool. Or it's like, yeah, you're the great ancestor of Dritz Duerden. It's like, but I hate it at the outside. And animals and scimitars. Oh no! You just have to like deal with that.
Scimitars.
I like that one.
Scimitars. My only thing with that is I would have a little bit of a tricky time justifying why, like, if you're Mordenkainen's like son, you got to be like, all right, why is Dad not going on this adventure and why am I doing it? I would have that little bit of a hesitation in my brain.
Well, it's always the simple answer of like, Dad is missing.
Right. I mean, it even says like heritage, so it could be like great ancestor, or like a cousin or something. Like you're not directly
my question
the
becomes,
descendant.
all right, so if I'm Mordenkainen's great grandson, why is my dad not cool and I am? Right? Like
shrug.
The JoJo reasoning, it skips a generation.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it skips a generation. Maybe.
What about you, Matt?
I think I don't remember. Like, I don't even remember what Matingo's was. I don't like. That's the problem. I think I know for Iridina is noble because, of course, vampire fucking noble house. Spoiled little shit she is. I'm very, very interested in all the Strixhaven backgrounds, for when I run it.
Yeah, I mean, the
Strixhaven
backgrounds are fun because they are very, very heavily tied to like what class are you in,
Yeah.
Class in the school sense, not class in the D&D sense.
Right. I think two backgrounds that I really want to use, but I never got the chance because I had never played in the campaign, and none of my players, I don't even think ever picked it up, or I've never used it, are the two from Tomb of Annihilation, the archaeologist and the anthropologist. I think they're very cool because it's like,
I watched a game where the archaeologist was, or the anthropologist was in it.
Yeah, and I think they're cool. I think it's a cool background. It's a cool thing that, like, in D&D, it's like, it's like, why isn't there someone digging around through all these ancient, like, Netherese ruins and shit?
Yeah.
Or, like, trying to find, like, old dinosaur bones and stuff, or, like, ancient history and cultures and stuff. It's like, it's cool. I don't know. I just like that stuff.
Yeah, that's a fun one.
Yeah.
Very fun.
But yeah, I definitely don't have a favorite background. I don't like think about them that much.
Yeah, I mean that's fair. It's funny. I think the one that I've probably picked the most of all of them is probably Soldier. It just slots really well into a lot of things, and I like playing soldiers. I like having that, like, I like that my character has some level of like player-based tactical knowledge.
Right.
That I can tap into whenever I want. I have a sort of open-ended question. Are there any characters that you had that you wished your background or your backstory was like, maybe you didn't have to finish it, but maybe explore it a little more?
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe. I don't know.
So,
what were you gonna say?
Probably Claw in Strahd.
Oh.
I would have liked if he had survived. I would have liked exploring because his patron was the Raven Queen, which didn't come up a whole bunch. I think it may have been briefly mentioned. And the Raven Queen has like beef with Strahd, and I would have liked that to become some sort of a thing. Like at a certain point, she rocks up and was like, "Hey, listen, I'm gonna need you to beat his ass for me," or something like that. That was a little disappointing, but that's also not. That's not on Sam because the character died. And then also Valenthe was a similar situation because she was a paladin of the Raven Queen, and did I ever mention she was a were-raven?
You did, yeah. We found that out at the last session when she poofed into a raven and was like, "What the fuck?"
Yeah, that was a situation where I kind of wanted a little more to slide in there, but it was tough because we were like close to the end and stuff. So I get it. Also, yeah, I'm trying to think if there's any other examples.
Yeah, same, because I think most of the characters, my backstory stuff has been kind of like pretty fulfilled. Like my lizard folk got to deal with his past stuff and like why he learned magic in our campaign. Matengo in Descent to Avernus got to avenge his father.
Yeah, it's funny for Descent into Avernus. Zigzag's backstory was very like sort of broad and general, and Zigzag's backstory was doing the adventure in general because Zigzag wanted to create a sweet epic poem to make himself famous, and that's what he did. And then he had a super sick ending where he picked up the Blade of the Avernus, and you know that Zigzag is going to embellish the shit out of that part of the story. So like backstory's fulfilled in that sense, right? Like, because his whole thing was he literally left the circus to go on an adventure, and then he did. So that one's almost like cheating because there was no way for him to not get his backstory.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think about like if there's any other characters that kind of like stand out in my brain. I'm like scrolling through my games a little bit too, just to be like, am I forgetting somebody?
I think the only other character right now for me would be like the Icewind Dale guy, who, I mean, not that it's really his backstory stuff, but it's basically we're in a spoilers. So for Icewind Dale,
spoiler alert.
Yeah, we're in an underground nethery city that's buried under the ice, and my patron, because I'm the undead warlock, the one from Van Richten's Guide, my patron is a lich who used to be a Netherese wizard.
Nice.
So he wants shit
that's
in
about
there.
to go somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's gonna go somewhere. So that's gonna be cool.
Yeah, it's funny. I was just thinking about my my Apocalypse World campaign. I was like, oh, I guess there wasn't really a lot of backstory stuff for that character. And then I thought about it. I'm like, that's because that character's backstory is really fucking boring. He was just the town doctor, and that was it. Like, his life was so incredibly nothing until the campaign started, and it all went to like a complete shit show. That it was like I was okay with not delving into his past because it like didn't matter in a funny way.
That's kind of cool, right? Because that's the definition of your character's backstory is what happens at the table.
Yeah, no, 100%. Like he was literally nobody. The only thing about him that was like any sort of interesting backstory tidbit was because of a move you can take in Apocalypse World as the medic, you get like a psychic healing ability. And so the only little weird thing in his backstory was, oh, he got this psychic healing ability at some point. But I left it really open-ended, and I'm kind of okay that we never found out where it came from. Like it's because it's a weird thing. I was fine keeping it as like this mystery that just sort of didn't have an answer. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that was an interesting. I didn't even do that on purpose. It just kind of was like that was just how that character was.
Well, I think that's something worth noting, right? Is that oftentimes it's really hard to keep character-based mysteries a mystery because players want to know. They're going to ask you out of game. They're going to try to do things most likely subconsciously that are a little metagamey to try to get that information into the public.
Yeah.
And it can just get to a point where it's so annoying that there's no point in keeping the secret. You're like, fine, fuck it, this is the thing. But I think if I have any characters, I think Actually, I think Grant is a very good character that I wanted to explore more of the backstory to.
Yeah.
You know, his whole thing with like his wife and kids that he like left in one of the like offshoot islands. And
Right.
and just like all like the fucked up shit he was doing, and people why are you going to the brothel? Don't you have a wife? And he's like, yeah. And everyone's like, all right, well, I'm not gonna try to unpack that. You do you. Boo-boo.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
There's a lot there. We're just gonna move on.
Yeah. I had one character in a game that I really, really wanted to like. Actually, it was a variation on my first character, Ilias. It was in the sequel to the Fire Emblem campaign, where like he wasn't human. He's a race called Tagwell, which are like were-bunnies, which are super cool. And that sounds dumb as shit, but they're like, yeah, no, it sounds really dumb, but they're fucking awesome. They're like hunched over. They're as tall as a person. They've got like massive claws and teeth, and they can kick you through a brick wall. And like he was like corrupted by like, and he was cursed by a goddess to be like a like Remus Lupin from Harry Potter kind of werewolf, werebunny. And he was like a boss for the players like twice that I got to control. And the campaign ended because just like the GM burnt out. The campaign ended as the character was gonna go home to his parents to be like, hey, so I'm cursed. And obviously his mom is one of this race, right? So him being like, I don't even want to look at her, like I'm a weird freak of nature, and she's all she's ever wanted is to share her heritage with me. And even now that she has, it's fucked.
Right.
It just, I wanted to explore that stuff so bad, and I never got the chance.
Yeah.
Don't think about it sometimes. It doesn't hurt.
It's funny. Side note, I just looked up the Tagwell. I feel like you're underselling them as just they're just bunny people, because their bunny forms are like hunched over like badass looking werewolf things.
That's what I said.
Yeah,
they look sick.
Yeah, they're not just like little fluffy rabbits. They're like were-rabbit dog creature. Like they look like Digimon.
Yeah, well, that's what I said. Like them hunched over are as tall as a person. They're huge.
Yeah, they have big like their rabbit form has big Digimon energy.
Yeah, I'll post it so Matt can see it. Anyone who's looking up what a Tagwell looks like, it's a Taguel from Fire Emblem
Awakening.
Yeah. Anyway,
they are awesome.
I will say though, quick question: what did you feel like Paz was a little unfinished? Because I felt like Paz was maybe a little unfinished.
Yeah, I wanted to do a little bit more with Paz's long lost friend.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about. His homie who like showed up at the end.
Yeah, and a little bit more with like his relationship with Dispater. But I sort of understand that, like, you know, there were 3 other players' backstories who all had to come up, and we were trying to reach to a goal. And I know that Sam was like burning out towards the end, so it was like, yes, I want to do more, but I tried as much as I could to get in as much as I could. So like meeting that friend, even, and I kind of liked that the friend never had a name, right? It was like this guy is like my one true friend. You don't get to know him. He's that important to me.
Yeah.
I liked that, and I liked that it paid off, even if it didn't pay off maybe as much as I wanted it to, because from the second that everybody died in the dungeon, right? And everyone, you know, Paz is like, yeah, I had a friend I lost once. That sucked. And everyone's like, oh, what happened? And he talks about like, oh, you know, I was a bandit. We were both bandits. And then we got killed by some of the guards in Baldur's Gate. And then a devil came to me and all this crazy shit. And everyone's like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Wild. You know, like,
Yeah.
and then it pays off. Everyone's like, are you lying to me? Because you lie to everybody. You're just a liar, dude. And then like his friend shows up. Everyone's like, oh, he wasn't lying.
Oh no, he wasn't
happened.
lying about that part. It was the one thing.
Yeah, it was the one thing. So yeah, it was a little incomplete, but like I'm willing to take that L because I think everything else on average felt felt pretty complete.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, fair enough. That makes sense.
Yeah, Sam did a good job.
That being said, because we're at 2 hours and 10 minutes, is there any thoughts that we want to wrap this up with? Any thoughts we're having?
Yeah, I mean, I think my point about putting in the work. Putting in work on your end as a player so that the GM will put in some work on their end, and that is the best way to like make a good backstory is that equal workload and that cooperation. I think is the main thing. The main takeaway is focus, or not focus, but like always think about that because I think that's important. That's my big. That's my. It's funny. I didn't even necessarily have that takeaway when we started talking, but now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, oh yeah, that really is like the secret sauce.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. I think my little word of advice is, it's okay to have a long backstory. It's okay if you have all of this lore for your character. Don't expect your GM to do all of the work in understanding that backstory. Put some in yourself so you can get as much out of it as possible. So like, it's piggybacking off what Josh said, but like, do a little work yourself to give yourself an even greater payoff in the end.
Yeah, I mean, it will be more satisfying too.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, I honestly, I think that's about it. I can't really like add more to that. Besides maybe taking out the little bits, the Spark Notes version of your backstory for your GM.
Oh yeah. Also,
maybe
side note, I don't know why, Matt. I just really wanted you to go. It depends.
It depends.
It depends.
No. It depends. Cool. No.
It depends. Oh my god.
Jeez. All right. But yes, the Spark Notes thing is that's a good point too.
God. All right. That's everything. This has been the Sessions Canceled podcast. Thanks for listening to us. Follow us on the Twitters and the YouTubes. Our Twitter, we got some weirdness going on with our name. It's fine. You'll find us. Thanks for coming, everybody. Bye.
Good night.